My hand trembled as I sat in her favorite armchair, the worn floral fabric a ghostly comfort against my back. For 50 years, this house in the Atlanta suburbs had been alive with the sound of my wife, Eleanor. Her laughter from the kitchen, her soft humming as she tended to her garden, the gentle rhythm of her breathing beside me at night. Now there was only a crushing silence, a void so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, stealing the very air from my lungs. My own heart beat a frantic, broken rhythm in my chest, the only sound in a world that had lost its music. I was 72 years old, and I had never felt so utterly alone. My thumb hovered over the screen of my phone, over the smiling picture of Eleanor we had taken on our last anniversary. It took every ounce of strength I had left to navigate away from her face, to open my contacts, and to press the call button next to my daughter's name. Brianna, our only child, the center of Eleanor's world. The phone rang once, twice, each ring echoing in the cavernous silence of the house. I cleared my throat, trying to find a voice that wasn't shattered by grief. She picked up on the third ring. "Dad, is everything okay?" Her voice was distant, preoccupied, the sound of traffic faint in the background. "Brianna," I began, and my voice cracked immediately on her name. I took a shaky breath. "Honey, it's about your mother." There was a pause. I could hear a distant car horn. "Mom, what about her?" I closed my eyes, picturing Eleanor's face, her warm smile. She's gone, sweetheart. She passed away this morning." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was calculating. I waited for the tears, for the cry of anguish, for the questions. I waited for her to share in my heartbreak. Instead, what I received was a cool, detached pragmatism that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, wow. Dad, I'm so sorry to hear that." Her tone was flat, like she was acknowledging a canceled appointment. "Listen, I know this is a terrible time, but when is the funeral?" The question caught me off guard. "We haven't set the exact time. This Saturday, I think. She always loved Saturdays." "This Saturday?" The surprise in her voice was sharp, but not with grief. It was annoyance. "Dad, I'm asking because this Saturday is Damien's 44th birthday. We've had this huge party planned at the country club for months. I mean, everyone is going to be there. All of his important business partners, his clients. We can't just cancel it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words felt like nonsense, like a language from another planet. "What are you talking about? Your mother just died." "I know, and it's awful. It really is," she said, her voice laced with impatience. "But Damien's career is at a very critical point right now. This party is important for us, for our future. Is there any way you can move the funeral to sometime next week? Maybe Tuesday?" The phone slipped from my numb fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. I stared at the empty space in my hand, my mind struggling to process the cold, brutal logic of her words. She had weighed her mother's life, her mother's final farewell, against a birthday party. And the party had won. A profound coldness began to spread through my chest, extinguishing the raw, burning fire of my grief. It was a coldness I had never known before, an icy realization of a truth I had refused to see for years. My daughter, the little girl Eleanor and I had poured all our love into, was a stranger. Her heart was not broken. It was simply empty. And in that horrifying moment of clarity, I knew that my wife hadn't just been taken from me. She had been betrayed. For a long time, I just sat there, my body rigid in her armchair, my eyes fixed on the phone lying face down on the polished oak floor. The house remained silent, but now the silence was different. It was no longer the heavy silence of grief. It was the sharp, piercing silence of betrayal. The warmth of my memories with Eleanor felt a million miles away, replaced by an arctic cold that seeped into my bones, a cold that originated not from the empty house, but from the hollow space where my daughter's heart was supposed to be. Slowly, my joints protesting, I bent down and picked up the phone. The screen flickered to life, showing Eleanor's face, her eyes bright with a love that had never wavered for 50 years. Looking at her smile, a memory sharp and agonizing cut through the fog of my shock. It was from 2 weeks ago in the sterile white room of the hospice. The air had smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Eleanor had been so frail, a pale shadow of the vibrant woman she had always been. Her hand, thin and fragile, had been lost in mine. Her voice was a bare whisper, a rustle of dry leaves. Is Brianna coming today, Sam?" She had asked, her eyes searching mine for a truth I could not bear to give her. I had swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "She's trying, my love. You know how busy she gets. That husband of hers has her running all over town." Eleanor had simply nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her sunken cheek before she closed her eyes to rest. I had sat there for hours holding her hand, hating my daughter for not being there, but hating myself more for having to protect my dying wife from the painful reality of our child's neglect. Staring at her picture now, the lie I told that day burned in my memory. The truth was brutally clear. Brianna's heartless response was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was not a mistake made in the confusion of bad news. It was the culmination of a decade of slow, steady poisoning. It was the final, undeniable proof that the man she married, Damien, had successfully stripped away every last piece of the compassionate, loving girl we had raised. He had hollowed her out and refilled her with his own cold ambition, teaching her to see love not as a bond but as a transaction, and to see family not as a sanctuary but as a stepping stone. My gaze lifted from the phone and swept across the room. I saw the stone fireplace we had built with our own hands, the bookshelves I had crafted for her ever-growing collection of novels, the framed photos on the mantle of a little girl with bright eyes and a wide, innocent smile. This house was more than just wood and stone. It was a museum of our love, a testament to a life built on sacrifice, loyalty, and mutual respect. Every corner held a memory of Eleanor. To let that legacy be sullied, to let it be defined by the selfish whims of our estranged daughter and her greedy husband, was unthinkable. In that moment, the ice in my veins turned to steel. My grief did not vanish, but it was forged into something new, something hard and unbreakable. A quiet, resolute anger settled over me. This was no longer just about a canceled party or a disrespectful comment. This was about honor. It was about justice. It was about protecting the beautiful, selfless legacy of Eleanor Vance. I made a silent vow to her, to the smiling woman on my phone screen. They would not get away with this. They would not erase her memory with their greed. I would make sure of it. As that cold, hard anger settled in my heart, my mind, perhaps seeking refuge from the bitter present, drifted back. It traveled through the years past the pain and the disappointment to a time when our family was whole. A time when our future seemed as bright and limitless as a Georgia summer sky. I saw her then, my Eleanor, not as a frail patient in a hospital bed, but as she was in her prime. Young, vibrant, with a fire in her eyes and a laugh that could make the sun feel shy. We had started with nothing but calloused hands, a rusty pickup truck, and a shared dream. We were Samuel and Eleanor Vance, two kids from the wrong side of the tracks, who believed that hard work and integrity could build a kingdom. Our company, which we named Vance Construction, was born from sweat and sacrifice. I was the brawn and the skill, the man who could frame a house with his eyes closed. Eleanor was the heart and the brains. She kept the books negotiated with suppliers and possessed a gentle, persuasive charm that could soothe the most difficult clients. Our office was the kitchen table. Our nights were spent poring over blueprints, and our weekends were dedicated to laying foundations under the hot Atlanta sun. Our handshake was our bond, and the quality of our work was our signature. We built houses for other families, creating homes where their children would grow, where memories would be made. All the while, we dreamed of the day we would have a family of our own. And then came Brianna. The day she was born, the world shifted on its axis. I remember holding her for the first time, this tiny, perfect being, her little hand wrapped around my finger. I looked over at Eleanor, her face tired but radiant, and I knew in that moment that my life's purpose had been revealed. Every beam I hoisted, every nail I drove, it was all for her now. Brianna became the sun around which our entire universe revolved. She was not just our daughter. She was the embodiment of our every hope, the promise of a brighter future. That promise demanded sacrifices. As our business grew, so did our ambitions for her. We didn't want her to know the struggle we had known. We wanted her to have the best of everything, starting with her education. I can still feel the weight of that first tuition check for her private elementary school. It was more money than my own father had made in a year. Writing it meant giving up on the new truck our business desperately needed. It meant another year of Eleanor mending my worn-out work boots. But as we watched Brianna walk through those wrought iron gates in her crisp new uniform, her book bag bouncing on her shoulders, the sacrifice felt insignificant. It felt like an investment in a masterpiece. Our lives became a series of choices, and Brianna was always the answer. We worked longer hours, took on more challenging projects. I remember countless nights coming home long after the sun had set, my body aching and covered in a layer of drywall dust, only to find Eleanor still awake at the kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating her determined face as she went over invoices. We wouldn't speak. We would just share a look of weary understanding. This is for her. Vacations became a distant dream. We would look at brochures of sandy beaches in the Caribbean or historic cities in Europe, letting ourselves imagine it for a moment. But those brochures always ended up back in the drawer. That vacation money became ballet lessons, summer camps, a better computer, a trip to Washington, D.C. with her school. We told ourselves that her joy was our vacation. Her experiences were our reward. One evening, I remember standing by the window with Eleanor, watching a 10-year-old Brianna practicing cartwheels on the lawn we had so carefully tended. The setting sun cast a golden glow around her, making her look like an angel. Eleanor leaned her head on my shoulder. "She's so happy, Sam," she whispered. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. "We'll give her everything, Ellie," I promised, my voice thick with emotion. "Everything we never had. A life without struggle, without a single worry." It was a promise made from the deepest well of love, a promise we kept for 40 years. We built a fortress of comfort and opportunity around our daughter, protecting her from the harsh realities of the world. We thought we were giving her a gift. We never realized we were forging the very weapon that would one day be used to break our hearts. Brianna was 28 when she brought Damien home to meet us. For weeks, she had been a different person, floating on a cloud of pure elation. He was brilliant, she told us over the phone, a rising star at a prestigious investment firm in downtown Atlanta. He was handsome, sophisticated, and he treated her like a queen. Eleanor and I were cautiously optimistic. All we had ever wanted was our daughter's happiness, and if this man was the key to it, then we would welcome him with open arms. The day he arrived, I understood Brianna's infatuation. Damien was the picture of success. He stepped out of a sleek, black European sedan, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it was sewn onto him. His shoes shone, his smile was a flash of perfect white teeth, and he had a handshake that was both firm and smooth. He presented Eleanor with a bouquet of expensive, exotic flowers I had never seen before, and handed me a bottle of aged whiskey that probably cost more than my first car. He was charming, articulate, and radiated an aura of effortless confidence. But as he smiled at me, I noticed something in his eyes. They were sharp, intelligent, but they were also cold, constantly assessing, constantly calculating. Eleanor, ever the gracious host, offered to give him a tour of the home we were so proud of. As we walked through the rooms, Damien offered a steady stream of compliments. "This is a wonderful home, Eleanor," he said, running a hand over the mahogany banister I had spent a month carving. "So much character. It has a real classic, timeless feel." The words were kind, but his tone held a subtle note of patronage, the way a historian might describe a well-preserved but ultimately obsolete artifact. He looked at our family photos, our comfortable furniture, not with warmth, but with a detached curiosity, as if he were analyzing a different species in its natural habitat. At the dinner table, the difference between our worlds became starkly apparent. He dominated the conversation not with arrogance, but with a smooth, practiced ease that left little room for anyone else. He asked me about Vance Construction. "So you really built all of this with your own 2 hands, Samuel? That's just incredible. It's real salt of the earth work. I have so much respect for that." The compliment felt double-edged. He was praising my life's work in a way that simultaneously placed it in a bygone era, a relic of a simpler, more physical time, far removed from his own modern cerebral world of capital and algorithms. He talked about market volatility and disruptive technologies, using a lexicon designed to impress and exclude. I saw the look of utter adoration in Brianna's eyes as she hung on his every word. She wasn't just in love with a man, she was in love with the glamorous, powerful world he represented. The true turning point of the evening came with the main course. Eleanor had spent 2 days preparing her famous gumbo. It was more than just a dish. It was a sacred family tradition, a recipe passed down from her grandmother, a taste of our heritage. She placed a steaming bowl in front of Damien, her eyes sparkling with pride, waiting for the reaction she always got, one of pure, soulful satisfaction. Damien picked up his spoon not with the eagerness of a hungry guest, but with the careful deliberation of a food critic. He took a small, hesitant bite, swirled it in his mouth for a moment, and then swallowed. He dabbed his lips with a napkin. "Wow, Eleanor," he said, that perfect smile fixed in place. "This is very rustic. So authentic." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. Rustic. A word you use to describe a barn, not a beloved family recipe. It was a verbal pat on the head, a dismissive acknowledgement of our simple, unrefined ways. I saw the light in Eleanor's eyes dim. I felt my hand clench into a fist under the table. Brianna, sensing the sudden tension, immediately jumped to his defense, her laughter a little too loud, a little too bright. "Oh, you have to forgive him, Mom," she said, placing a hand on Damien's arm. "He's just so used to all those Michelin star restaurants in New York and Paris. His palate is a little spoiled." Her excuse was meant to smooth things over, but it did the opposite. It drew a clear line in the sand. On one side were Eleanor and I with our rustic food and our classic house. On the other were her and Damien, a part of a more sophisticated global elite. For the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Later that evening, after Eleanor had gone to bed, her quiet disappointment a palpable presence in the house, Damien found me on the back porch. He poured 2 glasses of the expensive whiskey he had brought. He started with praise, telling me how much he admired the empire I had built. "But you know, Samuel," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "tangible assets like property and a local business are a liability in this new economy. It's all about liquidity, about being agile." Then came the pitch. His voice was low, conspiratorial, as if he were letting me in on a secret that could change my life. "You should seriously consider selling the company. Liquidate everything. Let me put that capital to work for you. I'm managing a portfolio of some emerging tech funds, AI, biotech, blockchain. The potential returns are explosive. You've worked hard with your hands your whole life. It's time to let your money work for you intellectually." I listened politely, but what I heard was the arrogant certainty of a young man who had never built anything in his life, a man who saw the world not as a community of people, but as a collection of assets to be bought and sold. I saw the greed in his eyes, the desire to get his hands on the money that Eleanor and I had bled and sweat for. I took a slow sip of my whiskey and looked him in the eye. "Damien," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Vance Construction is not just a tangible asset, it's my life's work. It's the 40 families whose livelihoods depend on it. I appreciate the offer, but I prefer the slow, steady growth that I can see and trust. I'm not a gambling man." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, a momentary crack in the polished facade. It was clear he was not used to being told no. He quickly recovered his smile, but the coldness in his eyes remained. He had shown me his true nature. He didn't see a father-in-law. He saw a resource to be exploited. As they drove away that night with Brianna waving happily from the passenger seat, a deep sense of unease settled in my soul. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that a shadow had just fallen over our family. That initial feeling of unease after Damien's first visit soon began to fester into a genuine fear. The shadow I had seen falling over our family was not just my imagination. It was real, and it was growing darker. The first confirmation came a few days after that disastrous dinner in the form of a phone call from my daughter. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Her voice was tight-laced with an unfamiliar edge of accusation. "Dad, Damien told me you spoke about the business," she began. "He said you weren't interested in his advice. I have to say I'm a little hurt." I tried to explain my position calmly, the way I always had with her. "Honey, it's not a matter of trust. Your husband is a smart man, but he works in a world of speculation and risk. I work in a world of concrete and steel. I built my company on prudence, not on gambling with tech stocks." Her sigh was heavy with frustration. "But that's the old way of thinking, Dad. The world has changed. Damien is trying to help us to help our family build real wealth, and you're just being stubborn." Then came the words that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "It just feels like you don't trust my judgment, or my husband. He's family now, Dad. You should try to remember that." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me with the sour taste of her misplaced loyalty. It was the first time she had ever chosen his perspective over mine, the first of many such choices to come. The most painful proof of her transformation came about a year later. Brianna and Damien wanted to buy their first home, a beautiful but expensive house in a gated community north of the city. They were short on the down payment, and my heart ached seeing the frustration on our daughter's face. One evening, Eleanor came to me, her eyes shining with a familiar, selfless light. "Sam," she said, taking my hands in hers, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the money from my retirement account." "What good is that money sitting there when our daughter needs it to build her home, her future?" I protested, telling her that was her security, the money we had carefully saved for her old age. But she was resolute. Her daughter's happiness was her security. The day they closed on the house was a joyous one. Eleanor was beaming, her spirit lifted by the act of giving. A month later, we were all having a celebratory dinner on the patio of their new home. Eleanor had brought a housewarming gift, a small dogwood tree to plant in the backyard, a symbol of family roots. As Damien refilled our wine glasses, he looked around the property with a smug sense of satisfaction. "This was a great find," he announced to no one in particular. "The market in this neighborhood is already up 12% since we bought. I was telling Brianna we give it a year, maybe do a cosmetic renovation on the kitchen, and we can flip it for a massive profit. Easy money." I froze the wine glass halfway to my lips. I looked at Eleanor. The happy glow on her face had vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. We both turned to look at Brianna, expecting her to protest, to defend the sanctity of her mother's sacrifice. We expected her to say that this was their home, a gift from her mother, not just another asset on a balance sheet. But she said nothing of the kind. She simply smiled, taking a sip of her wine. "Damien is so smart about these things," she said with a little laugh, as if discussing the weather. "He always knows how to maximize value." In that moment, something broke between us and our daughter. She saw her mother's life savings, a fund built on decades of hard work and sacrifice, as nothing more than seed money for a real estate venture. The love and sentiment behind the gift were invisible to her. All she could see were the dollar signs. After that, the distance between us grew from a crack into a chasm. The weekly Sunday dinners she had attended her whole life became a monthly affair, and then an occasional visit when it was convenient. The excuses started to pile up, each one a small paper cut to her mother's heart. Thanksgiving was skipped for a ski trip to Aspen with Damien's business partners. Her own birthday was celebrated not with us, but on a yacht in the Caribbean with their new wealthy friends. "We'd love to come, Mom, but we just can't say no to this opportunity," she would say, her voice full of a bright, false cheerfulness that did nothing to hide her shifting priorities. Eleanor would hang up the phone, her face brave, but her eyes filled with a pain that I was powerless to heal. The life we had worked so hard to give her, the life of comfort and opportunity, had become a gilded cage, and we were on the outside looking in. We were becoming a relic of her past, a sweet but inconvenient reminder of a simpler life she was eager to leave behind. The final chapter of our life together began with a word we never thought we would hear in our own home: cancer. It arrived uninvited, a malignant thief in the night, and began to steal the vibrant woman I loved piece by piece. The diagnosis was grim, the prognosis even grimmer, but Eleanor faced it with the same quiet courage she had faced every other challenge in her life. We promised each other we would fight it together every step of the way, and I kept my promise. I was there for every doctor's appointment, every grueling chemotherapy session. I held her hand as the poison dripped into her veins, and I held her head when she was sick for hours afterward. I learned to cook her favorite meals in a way that she could tolerate, and I read to her for hours when she was too weak to hold a book. I was her husband, her nurse, her rock. I was present. Her daughter, however, was not. In the beginning, Brianna's phone calls were regular. They were also brief, frantic, and always seemed to be squeezed between more important engagements. "Hi, Mom. Just have a minute before a conference call. How are you feeling?" she would ask, her voice rushed. Eleanor would begin to tell her about the latest treatment, the side effects, the exhaustion. But before she could finish, Brianna would interrupt. "Oh, that sounds tough. Hey, you'll never guess who we saw at the gala last night." And the conversation would shift to her world, a glittering world of parties and networking that felt a universe away from our quiet, desperate battle. The calls were a checklist item for her, a way to soothe her own conscience, not a genuine act of connection. Worse than the superficial calls were the broken promises. Hope is a powerful medicine for the sick, and Brianna wielded it carelessly. "I'll try to come down this weekend, Mom," she would say, and for days Eleanor's spirits would lift. A light would return to her eyes. She would talk about what she would wear, what she would cook if she had the energy. And then Friday afternoon, the inevitable text would arrive. Something had come up. A last-minute business trip for Damien, a charity event they simply had to attend. The disappointment would hit Eleanor like a physical blow, leaving her weaker and sadder than before. I watched this cruel cycle of hope and heartbreak repeat itself until I wanted to scream. The memory that will haunt me until my dying day happened on a Sunday in late autumn. Eleanor had been having a particularly difficult week. She was so weak she could barely get out of bed. But that morning she insisted I help her to her armchair by the living room window, the one that overlooked the long driveway. When I asked why, her voice was a hopeful whisper. Brianna called last night. She said they might stop by this afternoon if Damien's meeting in the city finishes early. That fragile, uncertain might was enough to sustain her. She sat there all day, a handmade quilt draped over her frail shoulders, her eyes fixed on the road. She refused to nap, convinced she would miss their arrival. I brought her tea and soup, pretending not to see the hopeful way her head would turn at the sound of every passing car. I sat with her, sharing in her silent vigil a helpless, burning rage building in my chest. The hours ticked by. The bright morning sun gave way to the long, melancholy shadows of the afternoon. The hope in her eyes slowly began to fade, replaced by a familiar, weary sadness. Just as dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of purple and gray, her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. Her eyes lit up one last time, a final desperate flare of hope. She was too weak to reach for it. "Can you read it for me, Sam?" she whispered. I picked up the phone, my heart heavy with dread. It was a text message from Brianna. I read the words aloud, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "So sorry, Mom, today got totally crazy. Something came up and Damien had to attend a last-minute charity golf tournament. We'll try to call you tomorrow. Love you." I watched as the last ember of hope in my wife's eyes died, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ash. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Her reaction was far worse. It was a quiet, devastating acceptance. She simply nodded, the small movement a gesture of complete and utter defeat. "All right," she whispered. I think I'm ready to go back to bed now." As I helped her out of the chair, I felt the true weight of her illness. It wasn't just the cancer that was killing her. It was a broken heart. In that moment, watching her shuffle back to the room where she would spend her final days, I understood that we had not just lost our daughter to a man or a lifestyle. We had lost her entirely. The compassionate, loving child we had raised was gone, and the woman who remained was a stranger, incapable of seeing past her own selfish desires. My wife, in her final painful days, had been forced to mourn the loss of her daughter, a grief that was surely more painful than the disease ravaging her body. The next day was a blur of painful necessities. I spent the morning on the phone with the funeral home, my voice a hollow echo in the quiet house as I made the initial arrangements. I walked through the rooms, gathering photos of Eleanor for the memorial, each smiling image a fresh stab to the heart. Every task was a brutal reminder that a future I had always taken for granted had been erased. My grief was a constant heavy cloak, but underneath it the cold anger from the previous day remained a solid core of resolve. I was operating on a strange mixture of sorrow and purpose. Then in the early afternoon the phone rang. It was Brianna. I steeled myself and answered. The voice that greeted me was not the cold, dismissive one from yesterday. It was a completely different person. This voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with a false sympathy that was more insulting than her previous indifference. "Dad," she began, her voice soft and cloying. "I just wanted to call and see how you're holding up. I've been thinking about you all morning, and Dad, I am so sorry about yesterday. I was in shock. I wasn't thinking clearly at all. Of course, Damien's party means nothing compared to Mom. Please, you have to forgive me. I was just devastated. I listened to the rehearsed apology, my silence a wall she could not penetrate. I recognized the performance. This was not my daughter's sincere remorse. These were Damien's words, coached and calculated for maximum effect. He had realized their initial approach had been a tactical error, and this was their course correction. "It's a difficult time, Brianna," I said, my voice flat, giving her nothing to work with. She pressed on, undeterred by my coldness. "It is. It's the most difficult time, and I've been thinking about Mom all night, about what she would want, about what she deserves." Her voice took on a tone of contrived reverence. "She deserves the absolute best, Dad. A farewell that shows the world how much she was loved, how special she was." I was doing some research this morning, and I think we should have the service at Oak Haven Memorial Gardens. It's the most beautiful place in the state. And for the flowers, we should get white lilies flown in from Holland. She always loved the lilies in that one painting she admired. Remember, I did remember. Eleanor had admired the painting, but she would have been horrified at the thought of flying flowers across an ocean, considering it a foolish and wasteful expense. Brianna continued, her voice filled with a planner's enthusiasm. And the casket, Dad. It has to be mahogany, the ambassador model. It's what someone of her stature deserves. And we need a full obituary in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a big one with her best photo. We have to do this right. We need to honor her memory in a way that reflects the wonderful life she lived. I listened silently as she laid out her vision for this grand, ostentatious spectacle. Every detail she described was a betrayal of the woman Eleanor actually was. My wife was a humble woman who found beauty in simplicity. She would have wanted flowers from her own garden, a simple service in the little chapel down the road, and the company of the few people she truly loved. This circus Brianna was planning was not a tribute to Eleanor. It was a performance for Brianna and Damien's social circle. It was a status symbol, a way to turn our family's private grief into a public display of their supposed wealth and class. The disgust rose in my throat, hot and bitter. After she had finished describing her theatrical production, her tone shifted, becoming more practical, more businesslike. This was the real reason for her call. "The thing is, Dad," she said, her voice lowering slightly, "arranging all of this, doing it properly, it's quite expensive. And all the best vendors require payment up front. Damien and I are a little tight on liquid cash at the moment, with so much of our money tied up in investments." She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. "I was thinking to make things easier and faster. Could you just transfer about $50,000 to our account? We can handle all the vendors, all the logistics, all the arrangements from our end. You shouldn't have to be burdened with these details while you're grieving. You can just consider it an advance on my inheritance." There it was. An advance on her inheritance. My wife was not yet in the ground, and my daughter was already carving up her estate, using her mother's death as a leverage point to get a cash payout. The sheer unmitigated gall of the request was breathtaking. All the feigned sympathy, all the talk of honoring Eleanor, it was all a manipulative prelude to this vulgar cash grab. I let the silence on my end of the line stretch out, a silence so cold and so absolute that I could feel her getting nervous on the other end. When I finally spoke, my voice was not loud. It was quiet, controlled, and devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a man who had reached his absolute limit. No. The word was a stone dropping into the conversation and shattering her entire facade. "Dad, I don't think you—" I said no, I repeated, cutting her off. "Your mother will be buried with the dignity she lived by, not with the gaudy spectacle you're describing. She will have a simple pine casket. She will have flowers from her own garden. She will have a quiet service at the chapel she loved, attended by people who actually knew and respected her. I am handling everything. The real cost is of no concern to you. Do not concern yourself with it again." I ended the call before she could utter another word, leaving her alone with my final unyielding decision. The line had been drawn. The battle for my wife's legacy had officially begun. I had just ended the call with Brianna, the receiver still cold in my hand when the phone rang again. It had been no more than 30 minutes, just enough time for her to relay her failure to her husband. I looked at the caller ID. Damien, of course. The puppet master himself was now stepping out from behind the curtain. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring until it stopped. But I knew that would only be delaying the inevitable. This was a confrontation that had to happen. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and answered the call, preparing myself for the next wave of the assault. As I expected, his voice was the complete opposite of Brianna's frantic, demanding tone. It was smooth, measured, and dripping with a carefully crafted sympathy that was far more sinister than my daughter's overt greed. "Samuel, it's Damien. First, before I say anything else, I want to personally apologize for Brianna. She just called me, and she's an absolute mess. I am so sorry for that call she made to you. She's not herself, Samuel. She's heartbroken, and when she gets this upset, she gets practical. She starts trying to organize things, to control things. It's how she copes with pain. She feels like if she can just arrange the perfect tribute, she can somehow fix the hurt. Please don't hold her bluntness against her." It was a masterful performance. In one short, eloquent speech, he had attempted to reframe his wife's avarice as a symptom of her profound grief. He painted her as a tragic figure, overwhelmed and lashing out, thereby invalidating my own righteous anger. He was not just apologizing for her, he was making excuses for her, positioning himself as the calm, rational mediator who was here to clean up the emotional mess. I said nothing, allowing my silence to be his stage. I wanted to hear the full script. He took my silence as an invitation to continue, his voice lowering into a tone of deep, confidential concern. That's actually the main reason I'm calling Samuel. Brianna and I were talking, and to be frank, we're genuinely worried about you. You're all alone in that big house dealing with an unimaginable loss, the kind of shock that would shatter anyone. The stress of it all, the sheer weight of the grief. It can cloud a person's judgment. It's a well-known fact. Major life decisions, especially complex financial ones, should never be made when you're under this kind of severe emotional duress. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I knew where this was going. He was talking to me as if I were a fragile, senile old man, a doddering fool who had lost his wits along with his wife. You're overwhelmed, he continued, his voice like silk. You're confused, and you have every right to be. The last thing you should be worrying about right now is paperwork, legal documents, and estate taxes. It's a labyrinth, and it's not something you should have to navigate alone right now. And then he made his move. The true purpose of his call wrapped in a blanket of false compassion. So here is what Brianna and I were thinking, he said, his voice now full of a helpful, problem-solving energy. Why don't you let us take that entire burden off your shoulders? Let me and Brianna handle the estate, the will, the accounts, the insurance policies, all of it. It's complicated stuff, but this is the world I live in every day. We can make sure everything is secure, protected, and managed properly, so you don't have to worry about a single thing. You can just focus on what's important, grieving for Eleanor, healing. We just want to make sure everything is safe for you, Samuel. We want to protect you. The condescension was breathtaking. Protect me. He wanted to protect me from my own life's work. He wanted me to hand over the keys to the kingdom that Eleanor and I had spent 50 years building, and he had the audacity to frame it as an act of selfless generosity. He saw me as a problem to be managed, an obstacle between him and my money. His words were a direct assault on my intelligence, my competence, and my entire life. He wasn't just trying to rob me of my future. He was trying to rob me of my past, rewriting me as a feeble old man who needed his benevolent guidance. When he finally finished his smooth, predatory pitch, he was met with a silence that was heavier and colder than any he had ever encountered. In that silence, I felt the last vestiges of my grief recede, replaced entirely by a clarity so sharp it felt like a shard of ice in my heart. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm. It was measured, and it held an edge of pure, unyielding steel that cut right through his facade. Thank you for your concern, Damien, I said, letting each word land with deliberate weight. It is noted. I paused, letting him feel the chill. But let me be perfectly clear so there is no misunderstanding between us. My mind is sharp. My judgment is sound. I am perfectly capable of managing my wife's legacy and my own assets. I built my life and my business on being clear-headed in difficult times, and this is no different. You seem to have mistaken my grief for incompetence. I assure you that is a grave miscalculation. I let the weight of that statement settle before delivering the final command. Do not call me about this matter again. I disconnected the call before he could formulate a response, the click of the phone, a final decisive sound in the quiet room. The battle lines were no longer just drawn. My son-in-law had just tried to cross them. My final words hung in the air, a definitive and impassable barrier. On the other end of the line, there was a moment of pure, stunned silence. It was the silence of a predator who had just watched its prey cornered and supposedly helpless, suddenly bare a full set of teeth. I had not only refused to be herded into his trap, I had called him out on it directly. In that brief pause, I could almost feel the heat of his fury, the shock of his ego being so thoroughly bruised. When he finally spoke again, every last trace of the smooth, sympathetic manipulator was gone. The mask had not just slipped, it had been completely vaporized. His voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of emotion, and as cold as a tombstone in winter. A grave miscalculation, he repeated my words, his tone dripping with a sarcasm that was sharp and dangerous. No, Samuel, I think you are the one who is making the miscalculation here. A very, very serious one. He paused, and I did not speak. I would not give him the satisfaction of a response. Listen to me, and listen very carefully. He continued, his words slow and deliberate, each one a carefully placed drop of poison. You should think long and hard about your next move. Think about your position. An old man all alone in a big house like that. It's a vulnerable situation. You know how things are these days. Accidents happen. People fall down the stairs. Furnaces malfunction. Things break. A chill colder than any I had felt before snaked its way down my spine. This was no longer about money. This was not about an inheritance. This was something else entirely. A man your age. He went on, his voice a low, menacing purr. A man in your condition really needs his family's care. He needs someone looking out for him, checking in on him. It would be a real shame if something were to happen to you in that empty house and no one was around to help. A real, tragic shame. He let the threat hang in the air, of venomous and undeniable implication. He was not just trying to scare me, he was warning me. He was telling me what could happen if I continued to stand in his way. He was threatening my safety in my own home. My blood ran cold, but not with fear. It was the ice of absolute certainty, of pure, undiluted rage. This man, this parasite that my daughter had welcomed into our family, was threatening my life to get his hands on the money that my wife and I had earned through a lifetime of honest labor. He was threatening to harm me in the very house I had built for her, the sanctuary that held all of our most precious memories. I did not say another word. I did not argue. I did not engage. To do so would be to validate his disgusting threat, to give it power. Instead, while his final menacing words still echoed in my ear, I calmly moved my thumb to the screen and pressed the red button ending the call. The silence that rushed back in was different now. It was no longer just the silence of grief. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. He was right about one thing. I was an old man in a big house, but I was not weak, and I was not alone. I had the memory of Eleanor, the strength of our 50 years together, and a lifetime of integrity on my side. This was no longer a family squabble. This was not about ingratitude. This was a declaration of war. And I would be damned if I let him win. After I ended the call with Damien, I stood motionless in the center of my office for a long time. His ugly, menacing words seemed to hang in the still air, a toxic vapor tainting the sanctuary where Eleanor and I had built our dreams. He thought he had intimidated me. He thought his threat would make me cower, that fear would make me compliant, that I would surrender my life's work to protect my own safety. He was wrong. His threat did not fill me with fear. It filled me with a clarity so absolute it was almost serene. He had shown me his true face, and in doing so, he had shown me exactly what I had to do. There was no more room for doubt, no space for hesitation. The time for grieving and absorbing blows was over. The time for action had come. With a newfound purpose, I walked over to the old oak desk where I had signed every contract and approved every blueprint for 50 years. I didn't reach for my cell phone. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a worn, leather-bound address book. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tracing the familiar names of friends and colleagues until I found the one I was looking for. Charles, my lawyer. Yes, but more than that, my friend for over 40 years. He had known Eleanor since before Brianna was born. He had been to our home for countless holiday dinners. He would understand. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and full of genuine sympathy. Samuel, my friend. I was so heartbroken to hear the news about Eleanor. I was just about to call you. How are you holding up? Is there anything at all I can do? His kindness was a balm on my raw nerves, a reminder that there was still decency and loyalty in the world. Charles. Thank you, I said, and my voice was steady, imbued with the conviction that now filled me. I appreciate that more than you know, but I'm not calling for comfort. I'm calling for business. Something has happened and I need to make a change to my affairs, immediately. The shift in my tone must have alerted him because his voice became serious. Of course, Sam. Whatever you need. What's going on? I took a deep breath, the decision already made, the words already formed. Charles, it's me, Samuel. I need you to change the will, not a small adjustment. I want to change everything. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I want you to begin the process of liquidating every single asset currently in my name and in Eleanor's. Vance Construction, the commercial properties, our personal home, the investment portfolios. All of it. Turn everything into liquid cash. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his legal mind, the shock warring with his professional composure. "Samuel, wait a moment," he finally said, his voice careful. "Liquidate everything. That's the entirety of your estate. Brianna. What about Brianna? She is listed as the sole heir to all of it." His question was the opening I needed, the moment to make my declaration absolute and irreversible. "My daughter." I said, my voice as cold and hard as forged steel, "gets nothing. Not a single penny from our estate, not 1 cent. The silence that followed was profound. Charles knew us. He knew the love we had for our daughter, the sacrifices we had made. He understood the monumental gravity of what I was saying. This wasn't a legal adjustment. It was a complete and total amputation. And Charles continued, my voice unwavering. "There is one more thing. A favor. I need you with me this Saturday night." "Saturday, Sam, that's the day of the funeral," he said gently. "I know," I replied. "And after the funeral, I will be going to the Montgomery Country Club. I need you to be there with me, not just as a friend, but as my legal representative. I have an announcement to make." He didn't ask what it was. He didn't question my reasoning. In the grim certainty of my voice, he heard the conviction of a man who had been pushed too far. He heard a man on a mission. "I don't know what's happening, Sam," he said, his voice full of a friend's loyalty. "But I trust your judgment. Tell me what time and I'll be there by your side." After I gave him the details and ended the call, a strange sense of calm settled over me. It was not peace. It was not happiness. It was the grim satisfaction of a general who has just committed his troops to a battle he knows he must win. The plan was in motion. The pieces were moving. Damien thought he was the predator. He was about to find out that you should never threaten a man who has already lost everything he truly loves. A man like that has nothing left to fear. Saturday arrived, a day cloaked in a somber gray sky that mirrored the ache in my soul. The funeral was exactly as I had planned it and exactly as Eleanor would have wanted. It was a simple, quiet service at the little chapel she had loved, filled not with a crowd of strangers, but with a small gathering of the true friends and loyal employees who had genuinely cherished her. We shared stories of her kindness, her quiet strength, and her infectious laugh. We did not use expensive imported flowers. Instead, the chapel was filled with the beautiful, fragrant roses and gardenias from her own garden, which I had carefully cut myself that morning. It was a farewell marked by love, not by performance. Brianna and Damien were there, of course, dressed in expensive black attire, playing the part of the grieving daughter and supportive son-in-law. They shed tears at all the right moments, but their eyes were cold and distant. It was a convincing show for those who did not know the truth. After the service, after the last of the mourners had offered their condolences and departed, I drove to the cemetery alone. I stood before the fresh plot of earth, a simple temporary marker bearing her name, the only thing to break the soil. I placed a single, perfect white rose from her favorite bush on the ground. The wind was gentle, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees that stood like silent sentinels over the grounds. For a long time, I just stood there, letting the quiet of the place seep into me. Then I knelt down, the damp earth cold against my knees, and I began to speak to her. My voice, a low whisper, meant only for her. "Well, Ellie," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. It was a beautiful service. Our friends were all there. Mrs. Gable told that funny story about the bake sale and everyone laughed. You would have liked it. I paused, the easy part of the conversation over. I took a deep breath. "There are some things you need to know, my love. Some things that have happened since you left, things that I have to tell you. I need you to understand why I'm about to do what I'm going to do." And so I told her everything. I recounted the first chilling phone call from our daughter, her voice filled with annoyance about a birthday party while my heart was shattering. I described the second call, the sweet, manipulative tone she used to paint a picture of a lavish funeral, only to ask me for $50,000 in advance on an inheritance she now felt entitled to. My voice grew harder as I spoke, the pain and anger fresh all over again. And then Damien called. I continued, my jaw tight. He tried to tell me I was old and confused, that my grief was clouding my judgment. He tried to convince me to sign everything over to him, Ellie, everything we built. He wanted to protect me. Can you believe the audacity? I reached out and touched the cool, damp earth. But that's not the worst of it. When I refused, he threatened me, in our home, in the place we made together. He told me that an old man like me is vulnerable, that accidents can happen. He tried to use fear to get what he wanted. I looked up at the gray sky, my vision blurring with unshed tears. I know what you would say, my love. You would tell me to forgive her. You would say she is our daughter and that a mother's love is unconditional, that she is just lost and has been led astray. Your heart was always so much bigger and more forgiving than mine. I lowered my head. And you are right. But a husband also has a promise to keep. A promise to protect what you both held dear. I have to protect our legacy, Eleanor. I have to protect everything we stood for, everything we built together with honesty and love. I will not let their boundless greed be the final chapter of our story. It is an insult to your memory, and I will not allow it. I stayed there for a moment longer, gathering my strength, feeling her presence in the gentle breeze. The decision was made. The path was clear. Tonight, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, I am going to their party. I am going to the celebration that was more important than your farewell. And I am going to tell them and all of their important friends the truth. Give me the strength to see this through, Ellie. Your strength. I slowly pushed myself to my feet, my old joints protesting. I gave the grave one last long look, a silent promise passing between us. I had said my piece. I had made my vow. Now it was time to go to war. The Montgomery Country Club was a world away from the quiet, somber chapel I had left just hours before. Here there was no grief. There was only the glittering, hollow spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with champagne and extravagant food. A live jazz band played smoothly in the corner, their music a sophisticated backdrop for the loud, self-important laughter of Atlanta's elite. And in the center of it all, holding court like a king and queen, were Damien and Brianna. He was dressed in a tuxedo, a confident, predatory smile never leaving his face as he shook hands with men who controlled half the city's commerce. Brianna was radiant in a sparkling silver dress, laughing and sipping champagne, the picture of a woman without a care in the world. As I watched them from the doorway, I felt a profound, sorrowful disgust. They were not just celebrating, they were performing, showcasing their success on the very day my wife was laid to rest. My lawyer Charles stood beside me, his presence a solid, comforting weight. We were two crows in a flock of peacocks, our dark funeral suits a stark visual rebuke to the festive attire of the other guests. As we stepped into the room, a ripple of awareness spread through the crowd. The music seemed to falter. Conversations died down. Heads turned. A sudden, uncomfortable silence descended as people recognized me, the grieving father, the ghost at the feast. Damien and Brianna saw us, and for a fleeting second I saw a flash of genuine panic in their eyes. But it was quickly replaced by their well-practiced masks of public concern. They rushed over their smiles, painfully bright and utterly false. "Dad," Brianna exclaimed, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "What are you doing here? We were so worried. You should be at home resting." She reached for my arm, a gesture of feigned sympathy. I did not move. "I am exactly where I need to be," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Damien, ever the master of controlling a situation, put a hand on my shoulder. "Samuel, we're so glad you came, but let's get you a quiet place to sit down." He tried to steer me towards a secluded corner away from the prying eyes of his important guests. I gently shook his hand off my shoulder. "No," I said calmly. "I will stand right here." The moment was tense. Just then the lights dimmed slightly, and two waiters wheeled out a massive multi-tiered birthday cake ablaze with candles. Damien, seeing an opportunity to regain control and paint himself as a benevolent, forgiving man, made his fatal error. He walked to the small stage, took the microphone from the band leader, and addressed the room. "Friends, thank you all for being here," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "Before I make a wish on this difficult but special day, I would like to invite my brave and beloved father-in-law Samuel Vance to say a few words in honor of my wonderful wife Brianna and in memory of his own." He held the microphone out to me, a magnanimous, self-satisfied smile on his face. He thought he had won. He thought I would say a few polite, mournful words and then shuffle away. He had no idea he had just handed me the sword I would use to destroy him. I walked to the stage and took the microphone. The room was perfectly silent, every eye on me. I was not nervous. I felt a lifetime of purpose converging in this single moment. "Thank you, Damien." I began, my voice calm, clear, and carrying to every corner of the opulent room. "You are right. This is a very difficult day, because this morning I buried my wife of 50 years, Eleanor Vance." A wave of uncomfortable murmuring passed through the crowd. Eleanor was a woman of quiet dignity, I continued, my eyes scanning the faces of the wealthy and powerful. She believed in integrity, loyalty, and above all, the sanctity of family. She taught me that our true legacy is not the money we accumulate, but the love we share and the respect we earn. I then turned my gaze and locked eyes with my daughter. My wife loved her family with every fiber of her being, which is why when she passed away, I expected my daughter's first instinct to be one of shared, inconsolable grief. I let a long, heavy silence hang in the air. Instead, her first and most pressing concern was that her mother's funeral might conflict with this lovely party we are all enjoying tonight. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was sharp and audible. I saw Damien's smile evaporate, his face turning pale. Brianna's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with horror. My daughter and her husband have worked very hard to show me what they truly value. I said, my voice now ringing with an undeniable power that came from a place of pure righteous anger. And so in my wife's honor, I have decided to respect their values by making a final decision regarding the estate that Eleanor and I built together. I looked directly at them, two statues frozen in a spotlight of their own making. Our $5 million estate will not be going to my daughter, Brianna. The shock in the room was a physical force. It was dead silent. Instead, I announced, my voice booming in the stillness as of this morning with the help of my legal counsel. Mr. Charles, the entirety of our assets will be used to create two new charitable foundations in my wife's name. The first is the Eleanor Vance Scholarship Fund to provide full college educations for underprivileged African American students who value learning and opportunity. The second donation will build and endow the Eleanor Vance Memorial Wing at the Northside Hospice to provide comfort care and dignity for other families in their final days. I placed the microphone gently on a nearby table. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Then the whispers began spreading through the crowd like a fire. Every single eye, filled with a mixture of shock, pity, and contempt, was fixed on Brianna and Damien. I watched as the blood drained from their faces, their confident, smug expressions collapsing into masks of pure, slack-jawed horror. Their public image, the carefully constructed facade they valued above all else, had just been irrevocably shattered in front of everyone who mattered. The punishment was not the loss of the money. It was this public, undeniable, and eternal humiliation. My speech was over. Their nightmare had just begun. I did not wait to see the full extent of the carnage my words had caused. As soon as I set the microphone down, I turned and walked off the stage with a sense of finality I had not felt in years. I did not look at my daughter or her husband. I did not need to. I could feel the weight of their humiliation, the collective stare of their entire social world burning into their backs. Charles met me at the edge of the room, a look of profound respect in his eyes. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, and together we walked out of that ballroom, leaving the chaos, the whispers, and the wreckage of two meticulously crafted lives behind us. The cool night air of the parking lot felt clean and sharp against my face. We were almost to Charles's car when I heard frantic footsteps on the asphalt behind me and a desperate, choked cry. "Dad. Wait!" Brianna ran to me, her beautiful silver dress looking garish and out of place under the harsh orange glow of the parking lot lights. Her face was a mess of tears and running mascara, her expression one of complete, utter desperation. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my coat sleeve. "Dad, how could you do this to me?" she sobbed, her voice cracking. "How could you do this to your own daughter? Everything. You've taken everything from me." I stopped and looked at her, truly, looked at her for the last time. The anger was gone now, washed away by the tide of my actions. All that remained was a vast, deep ocean of sorrow. Sorrow for the little girl she once was, and for the empty, grasping woman she had become. I saw no remorse in her eyes, only the selfish terror of a person who had just lost her fortune. Gently, I pried her fingers from my arm. My voice when I spoke was not harsh. It was quiet, and it was final. "I didn't do this to you, Brianna," I said softly. "You did this to yourself." I then turned away and got into the car beside Charles, and I did not look back as we drove away, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of the life she had chosen. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, and the heavy cloak of my grief began to transform into a soft blanket of warm memories. On a bright, sun-drenched afternoon, I stood on the patio of a brand new building, a plaque on the wall gleaming in the light. It read, "The Eleanor Vance Memorial Wing." I was not alone. I was surrounded by a group of bright, intelligent, and energetic young people. They were the first recipients of the Eleanor Vance Scholarship Fund, their faces full of a hope and promise that was truly priceless. We were laughing, sharing stories. One young woman, an aspiring architect, was telling me about her dream of designing affordable community housing. A young man, a future doctor, was explaining his passion for serving rural communities. They were not my family by blood, but in that moment they felt more like my children than my own daughter had in years. They were the living, breathing embodiment of Eleanor's spirit of generosity and hope. Her legacy was not a static pile of money in a bank account. It was here in the dreams of these incredible students in the future comfort this new building would provide for families in need. I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The crushing weight that I had carried for so long was finally gone, replaced by a sense of profound peace. I was no longer a lonely old man haunted by betrayal. I was the proud guardian of my wife's beautiful, ever-growing legacy. And for the first time in a long, long time, my heart felt full. I smiled a genuine, peaceful smile. My wife was gone, but our love was now immortal. True inheritance is not measured by the assets listed in a will, but by the values engraved upon the hearts of others. Greed may claim an estate, but it can never purchase a legacy, for a true legacy is earned through a lifetime of love, respect, and integrity.